All right. Good morning, everybody, and happy Tuesday. Welcome to our salt and freshwater invasive species prevention workshop. We are very excited to have you all joining us today. And I wanted to make sure that you have access to the handouts that we have sent you a couple of times, including the agenda. So let me give the opportunity to introduce the team. So Catherine, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Catherine Mandela. I'm with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I cover the aquatic invasive species for the Bay Delta region. So that's everything west of Sacramento and Stockton, between Santa Cruz and Sonoma.
Excellent. Thank you, Catherine. And Cesar, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good morning, everybody. Cesar Blanco. I'm with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I am the Aquatic Invasive Species Program Manager for my region, which includes California, Nevada, and the Klamath Basin. Thanks.
Thank you, Cesar, and welcome. And our last speaker is Jonathan Thompson. Jonathan.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jonathan Thompson. I'm a senior environmental scientist with the California State Lands Commission's Marine Invasive Species Program.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. So couple of ground meeting rules for today. I'm going to keep everybody muted so we don't create the background noise that usually Zoom tends to create. Also, excuse me, I'm going to make sure that you have plenty of opportunity to ask questions. We have allocated, as you may remember from the agenda that we will be reviewing next, allocated time for you to ask questions. So I will be asking you to please refrain from using the chat during the presentations. The reason why is that the chat tends to disrupt a little bit the flow of the meeting or the workshop, and sometimes the speakers tend to look at the chat and get distracted. So of course your questions will be covered during the question and answer section, and please ask the questions during that time. I want to invite everybody to turn on your cameras if possible, so we'll make it more like a personal or personable opportunity here to be at the workshop. Also, it gives us opportunity to check if you guys are doing okay. Make sure that your camera doesn't have the red diagonal line on top of the icon. That means that we're seeing you. Everybody will be muted, again, just to avoid creating the background noise. But of course, you will have the opportunity to ask questions. I understand some people don't have a built-in camera, or your internet gets super slow if you have your camera on, so no worries about that. For you to ask questions, please use the chat, or you can also raise your hand depending on the function that you have in Zoom, and we will be able to go over the questions. All right, so I put together this map to show you who is joining us today, so you get excited. We have a great representation of the entire state. We have people from Alameda, Calaveras, Contra Costa, Dorado, Humboldt, LA, Marin, Mendocino, Napa, Orange, Riverside, Santa Barbara, San Diego, San Francisco, San Joaquin, San Luis Obispo, San Mateo, Santa Clara, Shasta, Solano, Sonoma, Stanislaus, Tehama, Trinity, and we are super excited to have two people internationally joining us from Bermuda and also Papua New Guinea. So this is fantastic. And I listed on the right the background of who is joining us today, including from federal agencies, state, local agencies, marinas, yacht clubs, boaters, Coast Guard auxiliary, power squadrons, marine business, harbor associations, water, utility and conservation district, marine patrol. So we have a fantastic group of people who are excited to join us and, of course, learn a lot about this topic. Really quickly, and based on the agenda that you receive and the information that called your attention to stop from your daily routine and joining us today for this educational opportunity or workshop. We're going to start first from a bird's eye view perspective, and we're going to learn about why we need to care about invasive species, and also cost, operational impacts, and potential problems. Then we're going to have a section for questions, and then we're going to focus our attention on the marine invasive species. Jonathan will be leading that particular section. Cesar will be leading the bird's eye view perspective. Then we will have questions, break, come back, and then focus on Wagga zebra and golden mussels, which, as you may remember, those are specifically freshwater invasive species. Then we will have questions, wrap up our workshop, and then we're going to ask you to please help us filling out the evaluation form. All right, so having said that, now we're going to move into the bird's eye view perspective, the regional invasive species issue, cost, operational impacts, and potential problems. And I'm going just to stop sharing here my screen. And Cesar, is all yours. Let me know when you want me to launch the poll. So FYI for everybody, we have been trying to make these workshops really interactive. So we're going to be asking you, of course, to participate in some polls that help us to test your knowledge before and after the workshop. And we will be more interactive that way. So Cesar, it's all yours.
Yeah, so first, are we going to start with the poll question? I don't have capability to post
Yeah,
that.
I can. I'm in charge of that, as you remember. So I'll launch the poll right now.
Okay. So, first poll question to see how educated folks are on invasive species is the first question. Global annual estimated cost of invasive species is approximately how much in dollars? Is it 40 million, 400 billion, 400 trillion, or 400 million?
And what I will do, Cesar, I'll let you know when I'll stop the poll. The goal would be to have closer to 80% participation. So I want to ask everybody to please participate in the poll. I'll give you a minute. We are 20 seconds away from completing that minute, and we are at almost 80% participation. So a couple of more
91
responses.
now.
All right, let me just stop and the poll and then share the results so you can guide us, Cesar, in terms of the response.
Okay, the correct answer is B, $400 billion annually, globally. The big number. So, and it just drives home the point that invasive species are problems once they establish themselves. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So as I said earlier, my name is Cesar Blanco with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm going to give you guys an overview of why we should really care about invasive species. And so here's a summary of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to define what invasive species are, identify some of the costs associated with invasive species, pathways of establishment and spread, some key examples of invasive species and the problems they cause, and I'm going to spotlight some California coastal invaders and concerns, provide you with some tools we use and what you can do as a private citizen to help stem the flow of invasive species. So, as defined, invasive species is any organism that causes ecological or economic harm in a new environment where it's not native. Some basic general traits of invasive species: they're fast growers, They're aggressive competitors. They reproduce rapidly. They have a high propensity for disbursement, phenotypic and ecological plasticity, meaning they're very adaptable. They are generalists, and one of the main reasons why invasive species can get a hold is they don't have a native predator. So here we are in the San Francisco Bay and the Bay Delta region. It's one of the most heavily invaded regions in North America and hosts more than 210 introduced aquatic invasive species. For over 150 years, the Bay Delta has been exposed to continuous introductions of non-native species through commercial shipping, aquaculture, bait industry, sport fishing, water diversions, and recreation. And in the last decade, a new species arrives to our shores about every 12 weeks. So this is just a graphic showing the overview of some of the costs. Every year, the introduction of non-native invasive species into the United States has been increasing. Collectively, these introduced species have tremendous impacts to many things we value. And the global estimated cost of invasive species amounts to over 423 billion annually. I would also add that in terms of the United States costs, it's about 26.8 billion annually. There was an estimate of the total reported invasive species costs from a period of 1970 to 2017 in the US. And that total cost was 1.28 trillion for that period from 1970 to 2017. As you can see from the map here, the United States is one of the highest areas of invasive species invasions. So some of the pathways, how do they get here in the first place? One is aquarium imports. Another is aquaculture, not just legal, but illegal aquaculture. Right here is a Australian red claw. There's several places in Nevada where people have brought these red claws in and just put them into some ponds and having sort of a Wild West aquaculture out there. I spotlighted ballast water because that is the mode believed for the introduction of golden mussel. But there's intentional introductions. I believe that the mitten crab is a good example of that. Live bait, live seafood, and aquascaping are some of the pathways of introduction. And in the corner here is some carp introductions. And that right there is one species of carp. Grass carp, silver carp, bighead carp, and black carp are 4 species that have been introduced into the United States. Now I'm going to talk about the pathways of introduction, how they spread once they're here. One way is aquarium releases. There's also stowaways. I'll get to that in a minute. On the hulls of boats and in the ballast water of boats and equipment, on shipping crates, recreational activities, infrastructure maintenance, and field crews. So anytime we move something from one water body to the next, we are creating a risk. In many cases, the risk is easily identified and addressed. In other cases, it is much more difficult to track. Okay, here's one such example of how we potentially, we dodged a bullet in this instance, but this is an example of where these Marismo mothballs, these are sort of a decorative thing that people like to have in their offices. Basically, it is a green algae ball that grows very slowly. And people like to have it as quote unquote pets, low maintenance pets. And turns out that these mossballs or these algae balls were tainted with zebra mussels. They were found in several major retailers in the United States, including PetSmart, Petco. There's an online distributor called Wish, and they were found in 26 states, including Alaska. These mossballs were brought to the United States through a Ukrainian distributor, and there were nationwide efforts to stop the spread of this distribution of these mossballs in the U.S. USDA and my agency were coordinating to stop future importation there at our ports of entry, and the U.S. and USGS and Fish and Wildlife Service coordinated using eDNA detection to find contaminated products. And so, as you can see here, this thing, if it were embedded in there, you wouldn't be able to see it, but eDNA would be able to pick up in this case, zebra mussel DNA signature, even though it wasn't visible. I want to talk about some invasive aquatic plants in California's Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta. These plants are invasive because they can outcompete young native plants. Many of them have deep tap roots and to more effectively obtain water. And in this case, these floating ones, mostly in the delta, can spread through fragmentation. So one tiny piece can lead to an entire infestation. One such case is alligator weed, where it can take over entire ponds. Same thing with water primrose. I was involved in a water primrose eradication and just east of the Cosumnes River Preserve, still in the Delta, where entire pond had been taken over by water primrose, and they had to go in there with the big, construction equipment to pull out all that water primrose. But other such ones that you may see in the Delta that could take over entire, sloughs and such, or water hyacinth. Caulerpa is one type of algae in Southern California that has been problematic in Newport Bay and San Diego Bay. More on that in a minute here. So what makes them a problem? They can form dense mats. They can reproduce asexually. They are extremely fast growers. They can tolerate a wide range of water conditions, and they're aggressive competitors. So some problems that they can cause is they can clog entire lakes, waterways, and infrastructure for agriculture and such. They interfere with water navigation. They can displace and reduce the diversity of native aquatic plants. They will support a lower abundance and diversity of invertebrates, and they're less valuable food source to waterfowl. In fact, many waterfowl are like, "What is this?" They don't know whether or not it's a food source or not. Because they form those dense mats, they can deplete dissolved oxygen levels. They can increase the amount of sedimentation in some of these areas and cause flooding because of the huge aggregations of plant material. Here's some examples of non-native pathogens. There's the amphibian chytrid fungus, which causes somewhat of a keratinization of the skin of the amphibian. White nose syndrome in bats, whirling disease, which is a parasite in fish, and viral hemorrhagic septicemia, which is also another pathogen that infects fishes. Some characteristics of these non-native pathogens is they are catastrophic to afflicted populations. In the bottom left there, you see a huge die-off of fish from a pathogen. A lot of these pathogens tend to be genera or species specific. They're specific pathogens that attack salmonids, for example. They have the ability to persist in the environment for long periods of time, and then they can spread from location to location very easily. Examples of invasive faunal species include the Asian clam, Chinese mitten crab, New Zealand mud snail, Florida water snake, zebra quagga mussels, and of course our newest invader, golden mussel. Traits that make them successful: they're also aggressive competitors. They reproduce quite a bit. They can form very high densities. They can alter ecosystem dynamics. And they're generalists in terms of environmental conditions, and they can tolerate extreme conditions. Problems that they cause: their economic cost to the U.S. and also globally. They can damage infrastructure, a lot of our levees. This is a picture here of, I believe, mitten crabs burrowing into a levee here. They cause a loss of resources. They're the second leading cause of native species extinction and endangerment. Globally, they have created a loss in global biodiversity, and they have some human health risks, including Asian lung flu and West Nile virus. Here's an example of how an invasive species propagated through a food chain. So in '96, there were a bunch of bald eagle deaths, and their death was somewhat mysterious. It turns out that the cause of death was avian vacuolar myelinopathy. And this AVM is caused by toxic bromine formed in cyanobacteria, and the cyanobacteria were growing on an invasive species, hydrilla. And so how it propagated through the food chain is coots fed on the hydrilla, which had the toxin. That formed in their tissues at less than lethal conditions, but it caused some behavior changes, which led to bald eagles preying on these coots selectively. And of course, when they ate the tissue of the coots, that toxin bioaccumulated in the bald eagles, causing their death. So here are some invaders here in California that we should, if we're not aware of them, we should be. There's zebra and quagga mussel and golden mussel, and I think that someone had mentioned earlier that they are primarily freshwater mussels, but all three of these, and particularly golden mussel, can withstand some marine type of conditions for periodic conditions. So in particular, the golden mussel can inhabit some of the brackish areas so long as that they're flush periodically with fresh water. As I mentioned before, caulerpa it's native to the southeastern U.S., but it's invasive here. European green crab, Asian clam, and mitten crab. So about caulerpa, it's a seaweed that grows really fast. It can overwhelm native species and outcompete them. It has toxins in it that makes it not a very good food source for many grazing animals. It's native to the tropical waters of the Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean, and Caribbean Sea. Prolifera and 8 other species are outlawed in California for these reasons. In 2000, an aquarium release of Taxifolia in Huntington Beach cost $7 million to eradicate, and it took 6 years. Currently, we are fighting invasions of Prolifera in Newport Bay. It was found in 2021, and it was found in San Diego Bay in 2023. And we are still fighting those invasions right now as we speak. So European green crab, it's been around for a while, since about the 1800s. It was introduced via ballast water from European merchant ships. And it was spotted so it was on the East Coast then, but it was spotted in 1989 in California. And the suspected mode of transmission was through packing materials in the seafood trade and or ballast water. So the packing materials basically use seaweed as a packing material to ship fresh seafood from the East Coast to the West Coast. And they believe that was potentially one mode of transmission. And since it arrived to the shores of California in the late 80s, it's moved its way up north. And in 2022, it was found off the shores in Alaska. So it's considered a top threat to the marine environment. It's listed as injurious. It's been documented to prey on juvenile king crab in Alaska and then salmon on the West Coast. It can outcompete Dungeness crab and destroys eelgrass habitat. Asian clam, Corbicula, it's been around for a while now too. Same sort of traits, high densities, outcompetes native clams. It can impair water delivery systems by clogging the intakes. It traps sediment and forms bars in agricultural canals and alters the flow. It was listed, there was a document that came out describing the pelagic organism decline in the Delta, and Asian clam was noted as one of the possible causes for pelagic fish decline, because what the clams do is en masse, they take all the nutrients out of the water column and they bring it down into the benthic environment. And as you know, a lot of our native fishes out there in the estuary are pelagic, meaning they feed on particles in the water column. And so obviously if the clams take all the particles out of the water column, then the pelagic fish out there basically starve. It can bioaccumulate toxins, and the only way they can really control it is mechanical removal. Chemicals are not a preferred way of controlling Asian clam due to the potential side effects to other components of the ecosystem. Chinese mitten crab, in the late 90s, it overtook a lot of our state and federal water pumps down in the Delta. Since then, it's been pretty quiet. We haven't really seen many of these mitten crabs, although it did show up, a specimen was recently captured in the lower Columbia River in Oregon. So what are some of the tools that we use to detect invasive species? Because when it comes to invasive species, the quicker we can respond and eradicate the species before it becomes established, the more successful we are and the cheaper it will be in dealing with that invasive. So there's early detection and rapid response is a tool. Environmental DNA is one tool where we can detect, even though it may not be visible in the environment, we can detect it with DNA. Hazard analysis and critical control point planning is a way for us to look at all the activities we do under the lens of how are we increasing risk of introducing or spreading invasive species by the actions that we do out there. We have a whole host of wildlife inspectors and canines. There is a robust vehicle boat inspection and decontamination station, particularly at Lake Tahoe. There are all kinds of databases, global databases that you can reference to see if you're interested in any specific invasive species. There are all kinds of chemical treatments that we use. We reach out to others, and not one agency can do it all. So this requires a tremendous amount of coordination. So what can you do to help? Awareness is the first thing. If you're planning to go out and do some activities out there, just plan accordingly. Make sure that you develop and implement behaviors to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species. If you see any suspected invasive species, there is a hotline. It's 1-877-STOP-ANS. And then take an active role and spread the word about aquatic invasive species. Here are all kinds of things that we're doing out there that we're promoting: clean, drain, dry, don't move a mussel. There's the 100th Meridian Initiative. Just increased awareness is a great start. And that's all I have for today. If there's any questions, I look forward to answering them.
Thank you, Cesar. So great presentation that give us a bird's eye view perspective of the issue and why we should care. Want to remind everybody to please hold the questions to the question and answer section devoted as stated in each of the sections of the agenda. And yes, Cesar, you have a question. So David, if you want just to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask the question.
No, I was just commenting that it'd be easier if we didn't have split screen on our monitors and we just focused on the PowerPoint slides. It'll be easier to read that, Cesar, that's all.
Sorry, I didn't understand what you said. Can you repeat, please?
Yes, it'd be easier for us to see the slides if we didn't split screen between the video of Cesar and the PowerPoint itself. So if we shared the PowerPoint on the full screen, it would be easier to see some of the little pictures.
That would be up to your control. So you as an individual have to control that view. In the view section of your screen, there's a different way for you to be able to do that. We cannot do that in your computer. That's up to your system.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any questions for Cesar before we move into the next section? So he started just giving us, again, the bird's eye view perspective of why we have to care about invasive species and some very specific impacts and examples in the problem that not only California, but parts of the nation and also worldwide we're facing. Any questions before we move into the more regional topics, starting from the salt or marine invasive species? One thing we wanted to remind you is also in the link that I sent you a couple of times in the reminder, as well as in the chat that I included right at the beginning of the presentation. We have a handout with a variety of resources for all of you to continue to expand your knowledge, and resources also to report sightseeings, and also this information will be covered throughout the presentation. So let me just quickly check. Cesar, if you have any question, I don't see anybody asking any questions. So thank you so much for your presentation. And now we're going to turn the attention and focus specifically on saltwater invasive species. As you clearly saw in the information that called your attention to register, we're going to be talking about some specific invasive species. We cannot talk about, of course, all of them. We picked and choose the most relevant ones in order for you to be able to leave this educational workshop with some action items that you as an individual or in your facility, you can implement for that purpose. So Jonathan, the presentation is all yours, and you will let me know when you want me to share your poll, etc.
Hi there. Yeah, Vivian, I would say go ahead and let's go with that first poll there while I'm getting my my screen set up. Okay,
perfect. So I'll start with the first one, and I'm going to launch everybody a poll for your participation. So again, while Jonathan gets ready, right now in your screen, you should be seeing one poll that has a couple of options there, and I'm going to give you a full minute so we get your full participation And I'll let you know once we're getting closer to 80%. We want you guys to be active and learn as much as possible. All right, so we're almost there.
Vivian, could you please put the poll back up? Joseph Schroen, thank you.
Sorry, what did you say?
Joseph Schroen, DSO, Marine Safety, Environmental Protection, Security with the Coast Guard Auxiliary Unit. The poll disappeared about
Okay.
5 seconds in. Could you please put it back?
Oh yeah, sure. Let me just okay, so hold on for a sec and let me relaunch it. Okay. All right, so I'll relaunch it for some of you who couldn't see it. So go ahead again and I'll give you a full minute for that purpose. And thank you, Joseph, for letting me know that was happening. So we have a 60% participation, almost 70 right now. So feel free to participate and we'll go over the responses in few seconds here. I hope everybody can participate. We're almost at 80%. I still see some people have not participated, so please do so. All right, almost there. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll, and Jonathan, let me share the response so you can go ahead and walk the team over the responses. Jonathan, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, go ahead, and I'm sharing the response.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. I just wanted to give this question as just sort of a test to see how folks have heard about what they could do. So that clean, drain, dry message, maybe not 100% applicable for saltwater, but I still wanted to put it out there because that first one, clean, is a really important part of what boaters can do for the saltwater. And then also, you know, if you're going to trailer your boat, the drain and dry is really important too. So the correct answer there would be all of the above: clean, drain, and dry.
Perfect. So let me stop sharing the screen so you can now take over the full sharing your PowerPoint, please.
Sounds great.
Jonathan, you can go ahead and share your screen.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Okay. Wanted just to make sure that we're on top.
Okay, I'm not going to turn my video on during the presentation, but I will turn it on when I'm done because I'm looking at the wrong screen. So. Okay, just verifying that everybody can see my screen.
Yeah, we can.
That is great. Okay, so I'm actually going to be giving two presentations today. As a reminder, I'm Jonathan Thompson. I'm a senior environmental scientist with the California State Lands Commission's Marine Invasive Species Program. All right, so two presentations today. The first presentation is causes, case studies, and what you can really do. These are practical approaches to preventing the spread of invasive species. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about ballast water as a vector or a mechanism for how golden mussels may have been transported. And I want to go over some assumptions and facts with this relatively new invader. Okay, so the first presentation, causes, case studies, and what you can really do. I'm not going to go too much into the specific details of some of these species because Caesar did a great job of that, talking about green crab, talking about quaggan zebra, talking about caulerpa, and some of the others. But just as a reminder, how are species moved, right? So pathways and vectors. So pathways, really, it's how our species moved, right? That's some examples of some pathways are aquaculture, the shipping industry, aquarium trade, and boating. And then you'd have the vectors. And really what vectors are is those could be what species are attached to, or how are they being captured and then moved. So an example of that we'll get into in great deal in my second presentation is the shipping industry. And typically with the shipping industry, we're looking at for the vessels themselves. So what are they attached to? Well, the vessel, and that's what we call biofouling. And then you'd also have vessels that carry ballast water. And those are the two vectors for the shipping industry. All right. So some examples of species. I really like to break this up, and for your information, really, I want to talk about biofouling species and mobile species. So biofouling, like we talked about a little bit before, maybe you think, as you're thinking about the word biofouling, it means life that's attached or fouled on surfaces. And then we have mobile species. So those are, as it might sound, species that move around. Okay, so biofouling organisms. These are organisms that are attached to or associated with underwater or wetted surfaces. There we go. So two examples here of biofouling. The first example, right? This might be a common, if you've walked around in a marina, especially in the marine environment where there's salt water, there's lots of organisms attached to pilings, to docks, and potentially to boats. And as you can see in the bottom picture. So again, biofouling, we're talking about organisms attached to or associated with those underwater or wetted surfaces of boats, docks, and other infrastructure at marinas. Okay, so how about some examples? So here's a list of a few examples, just a few pictures. We have, there's a picture of Caulerpa. There's a picture of a club tunicate. There's a picture of Undaria or wakame. I don't know how many folks have eaten miso soup. Maybe that would have been a better poll question, but that comes from an invasive species. But these species, they can be attached, these biofouling species, they're attached. And incidentally, I don't know if folks are able to tell this, maybe even Caesar and Catherine, and Vivian, those are two different mussel species down there. And so if you've ever looked at a group of mussels, you may not be able to tell what they are just by looking at, you could say, oh, that's a mussel. Certainly if you're in a freshwater environment and you see a mussel, we don't have any native freshwater mussels that attach to surfaces. So if you see them, it's likely that they're going to be an invasive species, something that you'd want to report. Now in the marine environment, I don't even know that I would be able to. So let's, if you see something that doesn't look familiar, that might be something to go ahead and call in on if you're in the marine environment. And then some pathways and vectors, what you can look at doing, and specifically things that you can consider and that we're going to get more into are the aquarium dumping is one. Please don't dump, when you're done with your aquariums, don't just go out and dump them into your local water body. Contact your pet store. There's a really good program called Habitatitude. So you can go back to your aquarium stores. They'll likely find a way to help you dispose of them. But the other one is the organisms that are attached to boats and maybe in marinas, and we're going to talk about what you can do. Okay, so boaters, what you can do to prevent moving biofouling organisms. Well, you can coat your boat, you can clean before you go, And if you're going to clean before you go, there's different cleaning methods that you can use, and then develop a plan for managing biofouling on your boat. All right, into a little bit of detail here. So if you're going to coat your boat, you can apply an appropriate, or in some areas approved, anti-fouling coating suited for your boat's operating profile. And what do I mean by operating profile? Well, if you sit for long times, there's a coating for that. If you move really fast, there's a coating for that. So depending on what you do with your boat and how your boat is used, there's different coatings, right? And the benefits of the coatings are to really minimize that biofouling growth, keep that biofouling down to a minimum on your boat. And if you do that, not only does it help prevent the spread of invasive species, but it also improves the efficiency for sailing. And in the long run, it can end up saving you money. Okay, so you've decided to go coat your boat. There's a couple of different coatings that I want to talk about. Well, the most environmentally friendly are some non-biocidal coatings or paints. In the middle there, we have the biocide coatings or paints that are non-copper based. And then the least environmentally friendly are going to be those copper paints. And so, did you get all that? Or maybe better question is, do you want some more information about that? Instead of me talking to you about it, I'm going to say, hey, there's a resource. There's a resource out there that I wanted to point to you and let you know that it's available. Recreational Boater's Guide to Using Whole Paint in California. Now, I'm an invasive species biologist, and so I'm not an engineer. I'm not the one that develops these type of coatings, but I can say, hey, these are the coatings that are out there and available that as a resource for folks to look at about the different for the boaters to help you choose the coating that is right for you. Okay, moving on from that. Okay, biofouling organisms. So now we're going to clean. So you've chosen to clean. So you want to select that appropriate cleaning measure. And so when you're doing that, some benefits of cleaning are to improve maintenance. And that maintenance, as far as maintenance cleaning, can help prevent or reduce that biofouling beyond a slime layer, which slime layer is that little layer of sort of looks like green dust almost on your boat. And when that develops really well, that's sort of the first stage for biofouling, and then organisms can settle once that slime layer is developed. So there's two really big things that are beneficial by doing the cleaning and selecting that appropriate type of maintenance, reduce drag and promote efficient sailing, sort of the same thing as picking a coating. And then also it helps to maintain the coating that you just chose, right? Okay, a couple other things that I want to mention about the type of cleaning that you can use. So the other is you can consider hauling your boat out to be cleaned at a certified boat yard. And this can be a very protective option and can be an important part of your boat maintenance to remove that biofouling. And of course, if you're going to be, one of the other options is to do some in-water cleaning. But it's really important to check with your paint manufacturer, coating manufacturer, or your whole maintenance company to make sure that it's allowed in the area. And you're choosing the right type of in-water cleaning. I'm aware that there's some, finding companies that maybe do some debris capture, the cleaning with debris capture systems that are out there. All right. So we've picked a coating. We're looking at cleaning. We're choosing the right type of cleaning method. The next step is really to put all that down, and develop that plan you have for managing biofouling on your boat. Or this could be maybe you have a biofouling plan for your docks or marinas or pilings, whatever else it might be. So having that plan in place helps you understand all, is a written document that you can, that has to have all those pieces together and written down, so you don't have to go through those processes again to figure out what the best coating is for, write down what your operating profile is. And then the type of cleaning that you do and the area that you might be keeping your boat if it's kept in the water. And then if you have a logbook, you can help to evaluate how effective your that preventative maintenance, that proactive maintenance is for managing your biofouling. All right. So, did you get all that? Well, if you didn't, I have another piece of information that I can share with you. Okay. So this one, you can go to this westernregionalpanel.org, and the Coastal Committee developed this outreach information, and it has all the details of what I just talked about, plus more. And I just want to point out here one thing is, if you're looking at that picture of the biofouling there that's in this piece of outreach material, you can tell there's lots of different species in there. You may not know, hey, I don't know if those are invasive or not, right? So that's why I said really just keep an eye out for things that you haven't seen before. And if you do, that could be something to report. And we have that, and here's the other part with some of those, the coating and cleaning, and so on and so forth. Okay. So moving away from the biofouling organisms and really talking about now those mobile organisms. So what are we talking about for mobile organisms? These could be fish, like that lionfish there. They could be free swimming life stages. A lot of these species that are biofouling species have free swimming life stages that are in the water. Like if folks have heard of the quaggan zebra mussel or golden mussel, they have veliger stages that are free swimming, and we sample water to see if those life stages are out and about. And green crab is another example. Caesar talked a lot about that already. And then, of course, you could have pieces of floating aquatic vegetation. And some pathways and vectors for how these are moved. Really, the free swimming stages are going to be moved in areas that hold water. And a big one here is going to be aquarium releases in and around the marinas and boats. Really want to make sure that folks aren't doing that. The other one is that it could be organisms that are associated with biofouling. I think I'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay. So what you can do for mobile organisms, and it's not as much for this, but if you're trailering your boat, obviously we have the clean, drain, and dry. So the drain and dry for those more mobile organisms. Clean is always going to be an option. And some other things to consider, especially if your boat is in the water all the time and you never take it out, or maybe you take it out only to do some cleaning, to haul out and clean. But yeah, be cognizant that that bait and the organisms that you might be picking up, they potentially could have invasive species. Now, most of the time we're using live bait in the same area that it's captured or that it's purchased, but that's something to consider, is you don't want to just dump your bait out, especially if you know that they're not native. Don't dump your aquariums out. We talked about that already, about reaching back out to those pet stores or disposing it not in your local marinas. And then follow that biofouling management plan. Yeah, clean, drain, dry. Okay, with that, that's my first presentation. I will take questions now for that.
Thank you, Jonathan. So great presentation about a few of the most impactful, I would say, marine invasive species impacting our harbors, marinas, boats, and great information also about some of the educational resources you can utilize, taken from the handout that we provided you a couple of times, and also included in the chat. So I want to see if anybody has any questions for Jonathan about the marine invasive species he just reviewed in so much detail, which was fantastic. With the most important thing and the goal of this workshop, which are the action that you can take at your local level. Any questions? Everything is that clear. I'm amazed. All right, so we have a question in the chat. Jonathan, is from Sean Hastings. It says, effective methods for reducing biofouling on docks.
That's a really good question. You know what, I haven't ever managed biofouling on docks, but I would think I don't even maybe Vivian or Caesar or Catherine, if you have some ideas on managing biofouling on docks. I don't want to, I have some ideas about potentially what you could do, but it really is going to depend on what what is allowed sort of locally. I would think that the same applications potentially of coatings and the regular cleanings, potentially the cleaning with capture is really where you want to go with that. Obviously, it might be difficult to haul docks out to clean them, but those are the two that come to mind. But obviously, you want to stay within the local guidelines that you have as far as what's allowed.
Hiring divers is a big common practice to get down there and scrape them. And there's like machinery that will, while one is scraping the organisms, the other will hold this like attachment, like suction system to capture it and haul it out. That's one of the systems that gets used often.
Oh, you're muted, Vivian.
Yeah, sorry. Also the use of, also another strategy would be the use of anti-fouling coatings that can be applied in dry dock. Sometimes can be utilized for that purpose.
Vivian, I apologize. Joseph Chiron, U.S. Coast Guard again. Ask just a simple question here about, I'm not hearing anything regarding biodiversity and the effects of, like, when we're dealing with, hull cleaning, divers, whatever the case may be, and the residue that is left. I know what the focus of this is, but actually we're impacting the entire environmental waterway sector. We're changing the temperature. We're having impacts, regarding, runoff, et cetera, into all of our freshwater waterways. And I'm just wondering if we're going to be discussing that as far as a contamination and impact also.
John, that question would be more for Jonathan and Caesar, because I know Catherine will be focusing more on the freshwater portion.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
No problem. And if we get to the point where we haven't covered your question again, that's the importance of these workshops, is to feel free to ask a question again, just to make sure that we refresh our memory about your question.
Yeah, I think the question's getting at, and is this from the perspective, I think it was Joseph that was asking this, is this from the perspective of the like the in-water cleaning that might be done and the effects from maybe the in-water cleaning that might be done, and then also the potential effects of the coatings that are out there?
Exactly. Everything that we're doing tends to have an impact. You know, we're talking about microplastics now, which is not the topic of concern here today, but looking and seeing what's going on, how that all impacts, and how that impacts what's going on with the you know, the buy. I'll be quiet and wait until you guys are completed. But basically, we're impacting the entire ecological system when we're doing all this. And so what we're reflecting on in our trainings are ANS and AIS, and focusing on getting the public aware of exactly what you just covered, both of you, and you did great jobs on reducing the impact and proper cleaning of vessels, etc. And we're out there doing that and training and teaching that. And thank God we've got your materials to utilize when we're doing dock walkers or when we're doing vessel examinations or uninspected passenger examinations, etc. So we're making folks aware of this, and the same thing with the static environment, like you're talking about with harbors and marinas. And I know we're talking about coastal as well as inland waterways, and we're addressing those as much as possible. And then we're doing what we can to go out and assist the parks and the state parks and waterways when they tell us that they have an issue and they need more assistance with inspections, etc. So you'll see a lot of auxiliaries and Coast Guard personnel out there starting to function in that capacity now. That's in my area of marine safety and security, environmental protection.
Yeah,
Joseph,
Joseph, I think you kind of said it in already, and that is reduce. You know, I think that, you know, Jonathan would echo, you know, my comment I'm about to make in terms of, you know, there's really no one way to eliminate the risk of invasive species, and then, you know, in all of our areas, like, you know, in early detection and rapid response, we're trying to do everything we can to reduce the risk of introduction and then the risk of spread. I mean, even in Jonathan's area, you know, dealing with ballast water, you know, it's economically infeasible to eliminate any risk of spread of invasive species in the ballast water program. So reduction is really the only economically feasible term to use here. And in terms of, you know, what we do when an invasive species gets here, we look at all the options we have, and we want to try and go with the one, you know, economical feasibility is, you know, one consideration, but you know, we want to try and go with the methodology that reduces the risk to the rest of the environment, particularly our native flora and fauna. So, you know, it's all about reducing the risk and reducing the harm. Once an invasive species here, we want to try and control it. If we can't eliminate it, we want to reduce the risk of harming other species and trying to keep that invasive species in check.
Exactly. Thank you. And you also mentioned agriculture earlier, and we talk about everything from the high Sierra and runoff and how this all transitions down through the waterways and into our different locales, besides the introductions from out of state and out of area, which are occurring by vessels, and you're going to get more elaboration on that. So we're working very, very closely and hopefully supporting you very, very much. So thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you, Joseph. Great. So we are a little bit ahead of the game here, checking our agenda. This is the time for questions, but we can also go ahead and take, I think, a 10-minute break. So when Jonathan comes back, we're going to focus. He's going to switch his hat from the salt aquatic area just to the freshwater, and we're going to be talking about the quagga, zebra, and golden mussels. You can think about more questions, and please think about in your facility, if you're a boater, general public, or wherever is applicable to you, if you have questions for the hands-on portion of this workshop that wants to give you help and support. So I'm going just to right now set up the timer here for a 10-minute break. So you will see it in few seconds here. And please feel free to leave your camera on or off, and we'll see you in 10 minutes. We are at 3 minutes, around 3 minutes to start. So please start coming back to your laptop so we can start right on time.
Vivian, do I still have power to share my screen?
What did you say, Jonathan?
Do I still have the
Yes,
authority?
of course, yeah,
Okay.
all the way to the end. And I'll launch the poll whenever you tell me to do so.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, almost a minute away from starting. Right. Perfect. So we are back. Welcome, everybody. We hope you had a great break. And I hope everybody's back in your laptop or computer. And we are going to start right now. Thank you for your time and participation. And so right now, we want to start understanding a little bit about the introduction of quagga sigura and golden mussel. So we have created a couple of an additional poll that will be launched now.
Oh, not quite yet, Vivian.
Not quite yet? Okay,
Yep.
perfect. You will let me know.
Yep.
And so again, we are going to start, first of all, to explain to you, because based on conversations we have had with many of you voters and the different public across the state, there's a little bit of confusion about, for example, how golden mussels got recently in California back in October last year. So we wanted to start providing you with the full educational experience and understanding of those invaders. So Jonathan will be joining that part of the presentation, and then we will be jumping into the last portion, which will be led by Catherine. Jonathan, all yours.
Thank you, Vivian. All right. Here we go. So we're talking about ballast water as a vector and the golden mussel introduction, assumptions and facts. Okay, so first off, vessels as non-indigenous species or invasive species vectors. Okay, so shipping is responsible for up to 79% of established aquatic non-indigenous species in all of North America. And one thing probably I didn't mention enough in my presentation was prevention through managing ballast water and vessel biofouling is the most effective way to reduce invasive species and reduce the risks and impacts posed by invasive species. So if we can prevent their movement in the first place, then we don't have to do all the things that Caesar was talking about that's related to early detection and rapid response, and sometimes it's long-term control and management. Okay, so when we say ballast water as a vector, remember a vector is that specific piece of the shipping pathway where vessels can sort of be captured, right? They're captured in ballast water. And what happens is vessels use ballast water so that they can be safe when they're traveling across the ocean, especially when they're not full of cargo. So when they're offloading cargo, they load ballast water and they potentially load whatever organisms are in that water that that was used to fill the ballast tanks. And then when the ballast tanks are full, they'll travel across the country and then or travel around the world. And then when they arrive at that new port, and they need to pick up new cargo, they're going to discharge that that ballast water and whatever else they picked up in the ballast water. So those are those organisms. And then when that vessel's full of cargo, and then it can take that cargo to another area. So that's a quick snapshot of ballast water. So how is ballast water managed or regulated? Well, for ballast water, there's two different pieces, ballast water exchange and the use of ballast water treatment systems. So with ballast water exchange, they're going to exchange that coastal water or that water that's picked up in a port with, and so there's the ports usually have a higher concentration of organisms than you would like out in the open ocean. And in addition to having the lower concentrations of organisms, those open ocean organisms may not be as well suited to survive in the coastal environment. So that was the idea with ballast water exchange. So ballast water treatment. These are technologies that are designed to treat ballast water when it's sourced and discharged, and it's to reduce the risk of or reduce the likelihood of non-indigenous species transfer. So we want to use those technologies to decrease that likelihood of moving species around. So both of them do that. They reduce that likelihood. They reduce that risk of the likelihood and then the potential impacts from invasive species. Now, some examples of ballast water treatment. You might say, wow, what is this? Well, this is what I've been working on since, well, started with the program around 2012. But the way that I really started to understand this is I have a swimming pool and I filter my water in my swimming pool, and then I treat it with chlorine. And that's how, you know, a lot of systems work. But I don't have a saltwater pool. There's lots of saltwater pools out there, and they take advantage of that chlorine that's in the salt. Well, the treatment systems on board, the vessels that they install on board vessels operate very similar to that. So that's one method that they use. They also a lot of vessels take advantage of using technology that's ultraviolet radiation or UV to treat and reduce the number of organisms. Now, if you see, we're using the word reduce there. We're using that a lot because the way that ballast water is managed, and really for invasive species, and Caesar mentioned this, the only way to really eliminate risk is to not do the activity, and removing shipping is just that's not feasible, right? We don't want to do that because we need to move goods around the world, within the country, and around the world. So we want to reduce that risk. We want to reduce that likelihood to as low a level as is reasonable, but we're not eliminating. Okay, so in California, we've moved the current regulation is that vessels have to meet a performance standard. And what a performance standard is this essentially is, we have a table here, and really this is a organism size class, and then the number of those type of organisms that are allowed to be discharged in a given volume of water. So again, we're talking about risk reduction and not risk elimination. All right, Vivian, how about time for a poll? How many commercial ships arrive to California ports every year?
Yeah, and let me look for the poll right now because it just run away from me. Okay, here we go. So would be Jonathan, and here we go. So great question. On average, how many commercial ships arrive at California ports every year? So I'll give everybody a minute. We have 51 participation. Right now, we want to bump it up to almost 90. So Jonathan, once we're closer, I'll let you know. So the public will be all yours for your education. Almost there. Almost there. Few more. All right. I can take few more. Perfect. So let me end the poll and share the results.
Okay. Thanks, Vivian. Thanks for putting these polls together. It's really nice and gives folks a chance to look at and see, you know, learn some more about shipping in California. The answer is C. We get on average 10,500 vessel arrivals into California. The majority of those arrivals go into the ports of LA Long Beach and Southern California, the ports within the Bay Area, and then the ports down in San Diego Bay. And the majority really are at LA Long Beach and Oakland are the vast majority of our arrivals. But yep. Thanks for that, Vivian. Okay, so moving on in the presentation. So there's a little bit about what we do with our program. So yeah, I work for the Marine Invasive Species Program, and we provide those regulations. We provide that those rules for how vessels are supposed to manage their ballast water. But in this case, now we're talking about the standards that have to be met, those performance standards that I had just mentioned for those 10,500 or approximately 10,500 arrivals, and the ones that are discharging ballast water. If you want some more information about our program, you can go there. So we do inspections, and we're mandated to inspect 25% of arrivals at California ports every year. And we really try to get on every vessel that's discharging. And we have inspectors that are 2 inspection offices. One is based in Long Beach, and then the other one is based in Hercules, California, up in Northern California. Okay, golden mussel introduction, assumption and facts. We haven't really talked about the golden mussel introduction. Just really quickly, they were discovered in the port of Stockton in October of last year, 2024. And this is a freshwater species that has now been detected in lots of areas throughout the Delta. Anyways, okay. So the assumption is that this was a ballast water introduction. And in reality, it's most likely a ballast water introduction, given what we know. It could have been through biofouling, but it's most likely that it was through ballast water. One of the ways that a lot of species are potentially moved, like Caesar was mentioned about the mitten crab that's popped up in the news up in the Columbia River, is there used to be a lot of folks and there may still be a lot of folks that are asking to import that because it's an important food species. This golden mussel really isn't a food species, and it's likely it was a ballast water introduction because it's the first introduction into all of North America. All right. Is the assumption. We know when the introduction occurred. We're never going to know when the introduction occurred. Like I mentioned, it was first detected in October of 2024, and they found multiple age classes. So that means that they found little ones, and they found big ones. So that means that they had multiple spawning events. There was a positive eDNA sample. What happened after the introduction was the folks from the Department of Water Resources went back and looked at some of their archived eDNA samples, and they were able to go back to spring of 2023 and analyze. That's as far as they could go back. So it might have even been further back than that. But they were able to find an eDNA positive, which basically means that there was eDNA in the water, so DNA in the water from the golden mussels, at least as early as spring of 2023, potentially earlier. We just don't know. Assumption: we can determine which vessel was likely responsible. Yeah, it's really difficult to narrow that down without knowing exactly when the species was first introduced. We are looking at all the vessels going back that have ballast water that was sourced from fresh water and those low brackish water, so maybe below 18 parts per thousand. It's really a freshwater species that can tolerate brackish water, much higher levels than quaggan zebra mussel. And then looking at some of the data that we have from the past to identify how frequently ballast water has been discharged from these areas and if there was any patterns. So we can't really determine which vessel it was from. Assumption: introduction occurred because of a non-compliant discharge. Well, as you might remember, we're talking about reduction and not elimination of the likelihood of moving species around. So it could be that vessel was managing as it was supposed to, and the species still got through. We are working on an emergency rulemaking, so we currently don't require exchange in addition to treatment for our areas like they do, like Oregon does and the Great Lakes do. So we're working on that to require that combination of methods where we're going to have vessels that have sourced their ballast water in fresh or brackish water to do that exchange, which, as we talked about earlier, is a risk reduction in that you're exchanging those coastal organisms with those open ocean organisms, and then also taking advantage of using those treatment systems. So the combination of the two the two management activities, so exchange and treatment. Okay, just the last little pieces, if you wanted to look at some of the data for California, or we have a this PAC-DASH, this Pacific States data sharing. If you wanted to go check those out, you could. I'll leave that up for a second, and that's the end of my presentation. So I'll leave this up because my next slide is just says thank you, and questions, but I figure it's better to leave this up. Just the next slide just has my contact information, and you can get that from going to our website as well.
Thank you, Jonathan. And for the rest of the team, while you think about your questions, we will be sending you a follow-up email right after the workshop with tons of resources, including the contact information for each of the speakers. So if later on, if you're like me, that you allow the information to get digested and you come up with more questions, you can contact them directly. I think this presentation is key to understand and respond to a lot of the questions we're getting from the public in terms of what happened, why we couldn't prevent these from happening, etc. And as you can see, it's a very complicated process and ecosystem that we are all living in. But I think this information that was so well presented by Jonathan really clears that information. So want to give everybody the opportunity to ask any questions about the introduction of the golden mussel to the state that started October last year in the Delta region, before we jump into the more extensive and in-depth biology characteristics and what you can do to prevent quagga, golden, and zebra mussels from spreading more. Or if you have any questions for Jonathan about his previous fantastic marine invasive species presentation, this is the perfect opportunity to do so. All right, we have a question. Will requiring exchange for brackish ports impact the ecosystem by changing salinity from the release of the ballast water at the port? And Jonathan, that question is also included in the chat in case you want to read it again. It's from one of our participants, Cole.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Let me know if you want me to read it again, or you can read it from the chat.
No, I've got it. Yeah, so will requiring exchange for brackish ports impact the ecosystem by changing salinity in the release? So right now, and for many, many years, vessels that arrive at fresh and brackish water ports, and we didn't have a map up there, but for those of you familiar with Sacramento and Stockton, we have ports there where vessels arrive. And right now, it's a very small amount of marine water, so there could be, some. It's not going to be enough to really change the ecosystem. I think that's what the question was asking, is if those the discharges would impact the ecosystem. The biggest impact is going to be the potential for species to come in with that ballast water.
Excellent. I received another question. It says, how many of the 25% vessels inspected have been shown to have a non-invasive species?
Yeah, during our inspection, we do very little sampling, and the whole world of ballast water sampling is a developing industry and methodology. When we go on board, we're checking to make sure that the vessels have all of their documentation in order, and that their systems are operating as they're supposed to be operating. And there's very strict rules for the type of records and documentation that vessels have to maintain that are either implemented by the U.S. Coast Guard or internationally through the International Maritime Organization. So we're going on board to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do in most cases.
Excellent.
So we're not looking for individual species.
Great. So we have Christopher. Feel free to unmute yourself, Christopher. Thank you.
Hi, Christopher from Sweden, living in Palo Alto. I'm interested in the reasoning behind delaying this invasive species. If there's thousands of ships coming in, is it worth it to delay it a couple of years, or is it? Do you understand my question? When we had the COVID, we delayed it because we waited for a vaccine and we waited for hospitals to be able to take care of the people. But have we already lost the game?
Well, I think I'm not sure what you mean by delay. Are you talking about like responding to the invasive species, or like once they're
No,
here?
but ships are coming in and
Yeah.
species are coming in. Are we preventing or killing species at the same pace as they are coming in, or are they growing in our environment even despite what we are doing to prevent it?
Right. Yeah, so there have been obviously the golden mussel is a huge example of a new introduction, but since the surveys were done like in the mid 1990s, when surveys were done for invasive species in the mid 1990s. And that was in response to the quagga and the zebra mussel introduction in the Great Lakes. Folks started looking for invasive species like in the early to mid 90s. And that's when sort of the first big survey of the San Francisco Bay and Delta was done, and they found a lot of species then. And then since that time, and then since the ballast water management requirements have been in place and the performance standards have been in place, since it's been required to manage, there's been relatively fewer invasive species that have been found. And this is the golden mussel's unfortunate. But for the most part, I think that the regulations have been in place and working, and we're trying to add in that approach to help with the protection. So adding that exchange plus treatment to help protect from other species coming in. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it did. I kind of assumed that it was growing a lot, but not as much as it would have done without the preventions. But thanks.
And we have a new question that is going to be addressed by Catherine, which is where else in the world? Oh, no. Where else in the world is the golden mussel found?
Are you is Catherine, are you talking about that?
I
I'm
am.
happy to answer
I
it.
am. In fact,
Okay.
I can even kind of elaborate on some of the questions that have been coming up right now as well.
Sure,
It'll be
please go
addressed.
ahead.
So, well, shall I just start the presentation because it's going to be all embedded in that?
Perfect.
Are we ready? Are there any more questions for Jonathan before we move on?
No, I think, Jonathan, thank you so much. Fantastic presentation. Very clear and to the point with the action items, which is what we wanted from these workshops. So now we're jumping into Catherine's world, which is the quagga, zebra, and golden mussel. So again, mainly freshwater organisms, even though some of them are pretty much showing resistance to brackish water as well. So feel free, Catherine, just to take it from there. And you will let
Okay,
me know when you
so-
want me to share the polls, etc.
Go ahead and share the poll now while I pull up my screen. And I'm
Okay.
going to keep my video off during the presentation, and I'll
Okay.
come back on. You all can see my mug when we
Excellent.
have the questions.
No problem. So I just launch another poll, which is specifically for Catherine's section. So please go ahead and utilize your keyboard, your phone, and participate with us in this poll. We have right now 34% response rate. I want to see everybody please participating. Once we get closer to 80%, we'll let you know. Catherine, right now we're seeing the poll.
Okay.
So in case you want me to tell
No,
you.
go ahead and we'll finish the poll and then I'll start my presentation.
All right. Okay, we're almost at 70%, so need a couple of more responses there. All right, almost there, almost there. All right, let's end the poll here and share the results. And Catherine, I'm sharing right now the screen.
So it looks like the majority understood that, yes, it's zebra mussels, quagga mussels, and golden mussels have the byssal threads, which if you don't know what a byssal thread is, you're going to learn it in a few minutes. And there's even another organism that I will add to this that also has byssal threads that we need to be aware of. That's an invasive species. So I'm going to go ahead and start let me know when you see my presentation.
Now we see it. Perfect. We see it.
Okay, excellent. So as you know, I'm Catherine Mandela. I'm an environmental scientist specialist with the Bay Delta region, and I am mostly going to discuss mussels, specifically the golden mussel and the quagga and zebra mussel, which are in the Dreissenid family. I am going to move to the beginning of this section where really to address the role of our department, the department I'm with, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. There are several agencies, as you've already seen in this presentation, that is dealing with the different aquatic invasive species. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife is specifically leading the quagga and zebra mussel and golden mussel issue with regards to water agencies and recreational water bodies, whereas it's the Department of Water Resources, DWR, that is the lead on all state water project waters. And that includes a few reservoirs that are connected to the state water project, like Del Val, Bethany, and several others. So I'm mostly going to discuss what our department covers. And what we do is we facilitate monitoring statewide. We offer vessel inspections and decontamination trainings and workshops like we're doing right now. We also assist different water agencies and recreational agencies, including federal ones, to develop prevention plans and regional programs, since unfortunately we do have infested waters within our state, in how to deal with either preventing an introduction or preventing the spread. And to address that question from the gentleman from Sweden, is it worth, doing all these measures, or is it too late? Well, to answer that question, it's better to do nothing. Better to do something than nothing. And we've already learned by the fact that we have done things already, has already prevented the spread of quagga mussels within just California alone and the whole West. And it's already given the agencies that had a prevention program in place, for example, Lake Tahoe, Lake Berryessa, Lake Sonoma, many others, they already were prepared to screen boats coming into their reservoirs. which has put them at an advantage to the ones that didn't, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and why there were ones that did not have programs yet. So anyway, CDFW also coordinates with the Food and Ag Agency, particularly when there are vessels coming in and out of the state. And then we also have our law enforcement division that helps. Now, the prevention efforts in California are all done by these agencies right here: CDFW, Department of Food and Ag, State Parks, which Division of Boating Waterways, you have our lovely Vivian Matuk with us from that department, as well as the water resources, and then all the local and federal agencies. And really what I should add here is the general public, because the general public has actually played a big role in helping educate, spread the information, and be extra eyes out there to inform us of what's going on out there. I've gotten loads of information. When I'm out in the field doing work, I'll have boaters and anglers approach me and ask me things, and I've learned a lot of things from them. Now, these are the organisms that I'm going to focus on. As you know from what Jonathan and Caesar have mentioned, there's all kinds of organisms out there. And there's aquatic ones as well as terrestrial ones. But the top three I'm going to focus on: the golden mussel, which is, the Limnoperna. It's a different species altogether that I'll give you the details in a minute. And then the quag and zebra mussel, which are dreissenid mussel. And if you look at the top right photo where you see the thumb pressing on that mussel, the little attachments, those little stringy things, those are the byssal threads. And that's what they attach to substrates with, whether it's a dock, a rock, a piece of driftwood, and even other organisms. There are no native species within North America of freshwater origin that have those byssal threads. So if you see any species of mussel with byssal threads like that, especially freshwater, they are an invasive. And I will show you later in the presentation how you would report that. I do want to point out a couple of organisms down below. Obviously, the Asian clam, we've addressed that before, but I put that in there because a lot of times people confuse that. Me and my colleagues, a lot of us have been out and people will say, oh, well, I've seen mussels. The mussel's already here. And, because we know the areas, or sometimes maybe we're not sure, maybe there was an introduction. A lot of people say, oh yeah, they're here because they'll see Asian clams, they'll see the stripes, because in the beginning with quag and zebra mussel introduction, we were telling everybody, look for the mussel with the stripes on it. The zebra and the quagga, which is an extinct cousin to the zebra, they have stripes on them, and that's where the mussels got that name. Now, golden mussels do not have stripes, and they definitely look different. They're about roughly the same size, but they have a different shape, and they've got the ridges, but they don't have the striped patterns on them. And that's how to tell the difference between the two. There's several other differences that I'll get into as well. But it's good to know how to distinguish them, because there's so many things out there. Most people aren't biologists. They're not going to know how to distinguish one mussel from another. So that's why I wanted to share this. The bottom two photos are actually photos of native Californian, and quite frankly, there's this type of Anodontis species of mussel that exists throughout North America. So we'll see that there's cousins on the East Coast and central parts of North America as well. They're much larger than quagga and zebra mussel and golden mussel, and they do not have byssal threads. So if you see them, jump for joy, because we want to see them. And unfortunately, they're being outcompeted by these invasives. The Western purr shell, those aren't the best photos of them, but the Western purr shell is also another native mussel to the West. You find them more like in Northern California and Oregon and, the higher elevations. The California winged floater, you'll see more in the valley and coastal areas and parts of the foothills of California. So they're there, but like I said, and they're throughout the Delta, but they're having a harder time surviving. I added this photo right here. These are Asian date mussels. I wanted you all to burn this into your memory too, because a lot of you are along the coastal range, since we're including the marine organisms in this training, in this workshop. The Asian date mussel, also, it's got various other names, Japanese date mussel, it comes from Japan. They're throughout the West Coast, especially along the West Coast of California. And you could see they've got stripes on them. They kind of look like quagga and zebra mussels. They prefer brackish water, but closer to the marine environment. Whereas golden mussels, they can handle salt water, but they've got to be closer to the freshwater environment. So really, they can overlap. And I wanted to bring this up because there's been cases where there's been boaters that have taken their boat out of the bay, out of a saltwater area, and then they wanted to go, they're, smaller trailerable boats. They wanted to go to a reservoir in Santa Clara County, in the San Jose area. And some of these mussels, these Asian date clams, were attached to the boat. And the inspectors, they thought, oh, this is alarming. They actually quarantined the vessel. And then, once I got the photo of them and said, and we're able to determine it was, Asian date mussels and nothing to worry about for them to launch there in terms of spreading an invasive species, we were able to release the vessel out of quarantine. However, boats still need to be clean, drain, and dry, and should not be allowed to launch with any organism on them, which I'll talk about as we move forth. Now, the biology is kind of important with regards to the differences between quagga, zebra mussels, and golden mussels. And this is going to answer some questions as to why there were certain reservoirs that had boat inspections in place and others that did not. I'm going to go through basically, golden mussels are kind of like the quagga and zebra mussel, even more on steroids than we used to say. The quagga mussel was the one on steroids. Now the golden mussels knock the quagga mussel out of the park. Why? Because golden mussels can handle much more extreme conditions. So calcium is a huge one, especially along the West Coast. Most of the state of California has enough calcium levels to support quagga and zebra mussels and golden mussels, but golden mussels they don't require a lot of calcium. Why do they need calcium? Because their shells to develop their shell, they need calcium. Well, up until the golden mussel introduction, the high Sierras and other parts of the country and even the world, they weren't susceptible to quagga and zebra mussels. They might have even had an introduction, but the mussels didn't survive because they had very low calcium levels. So, Northern California, the high Sierras, with the exception of Lake Tahoe, which I'll get to in a minute, there was just not enough calcium to support them. Well, the golden mussel can pretty much live anywhere in North America and many parts of the world. And we've got people from Bermuda and Papua New Guinea, which I think is awesome. Chances are, if you check the calcium levels of your freshwater systems, it's very likely golden mussels can survive there. Let's go down the line. There's some other parameters that we need to know that will help us understand their biology and why we need to worry about them. So salinity, quagga and zebra mussels, they're really mostly a freshwater organism. However, quagga mussels can handle, I actually did a study, probably a decade ago now, to see how long it took a quagga mussel, which can handle more salt than a zebra mussel. So I took quagga mussels and exposed them to salt water over a period of time. And where most of the quagga mussels did die within 5-6 hours exposed to really salty water. Obviously, the saltier the water it is, the faster they will die. There was actually there was one quagga mussel that lasted 2 days in just semi-marine water. I basically got water under the Carquinez Bridge. That means that the water under the Carquinez Bridge is it's about 22 parts per thousand salinity. What does that mean? It means that it's not as salty as the ocean, but if you went and, you could smell the salt there. So it's pretty salty there. And the fact that a quagga mussel could survive 2 days exposed into that water, and this was a lab controlled environment, which, the natural environment's got a lot more variables and things have a way of surviving. So that's just something to consider. So it used to be a time where people said, oh, just go take your boat. If you were a freshwater boater, just go boat out in the salt water and decontaminate it for a while. Well, that may not always be the best thing to do, especially since the fact that quagga and zebra mussels and golden mussels, they're a mollusk. They're in like the snail family. Many of you know what happens when salt gets exposed to a snail. They froth up and die. And unfortunately, some boaters have had learned this the hard way. I had a friend whose brother was in the Coast Guard in Quebec, and they had taken the boat out the St. Lawrence River, and as soon as it hit salt water, because there's a lot of quagga mussel infestation in that part of the world, when they hit the salt water, all the quagga mussels died, frothed up. They had to be towed to shore, and it was a very expensive fix in dry dock. So things to consider. There's other parameters too. Again, golden mussels can handle less and more pH balance. They don't need as much oxygen. They can survive in really polluted water. Probably a reason why they're unfortunately doing well in the Delta. They probably, from what there's still a lot we're learning about the golden mussel, but we are in contact with places, for example, other parts of the world that have become infested with them, South America, so Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, there's some even in, what's the other country I'm drawing a blank, but we had in contact with a Brazilian scientist who let us know what they experienced. They really got infested with them around the 90s, where they started taking hold in their environments. And recreational boating and aquaculture, they said they found were the biggest culprits in spreading them in their countries. But there's, every part of the world's got some different parameters, and we still don't really know what all is going to unfold here in North America. And we are seeing that they're spreading rather fast throughout the Delta, and I'll have some more information to share. With quagga and zebra mussels, they come from the Caspian Sea area. So if you remember in Ukraine, specifically the Dnieper River, and remember the mossballs Caesar was talking about? Well, they were being grown in the Ukraine, and then they ended up here. So these are how all the different organisms can spread. The golden mussels come from China, but they have established in other South Asian countries, and there's some European countries that have them as well. Now, what are their impacts? There's the ecological side, the economical, and the cultural impact. You might wonder, okay, why are we having these freshwater organisms and having Catherine specifically talk about quagga and zebra mussels and golden mussels when there's so many others? Well, that's because they're the most injurious of all, not just ecologically, but also economically on infrastructure and cultural, human interaction and human activity. So ecologically, what do? Well, basically, in a nutshell, they're voracious filter feeders. So they're going to filter feed, basically causing the food chain collapse. They filter feed all the small stuff away. And eventually what that's doing is not leaving food source for the smaller organisms and smaller fish. And so they end up dying out. So for example, we'll see if you talk to anglers, in places like Havasu Lake, they'll say, yeah, you don't catch small fish anymore. It's just big stuff, because the small ones aren't surviving, and there's nothing that's going to come behind the larger ones once they're caught or die. There's nothing replacing them. So there's another element, another fact of they outcompete organisms. So that mussel you see on the far upper left corner, that's an Anodonta species, a winged floater. That's actually a photo from the East Coast. So they have an Anodonta species that is now endangered because of all the quagga and zebra mussel infestations on the East Coast. You see the crayfish that's been infested by them. I've even seen them attached to dragonfly nymphs. So I'm sure the golden mussels are doing similar things within the Delta. And the list goes on. There's also the fact that when the water gets clear, because the mussels are clearing up the water column, people think, oh, great, the water's clean. But that's not really the best thing, because that means there's no nutrients in the water. Well, what's happening is it's allowing plant growth to photosynthesize deeper. So then there's a plant boom stage. And then plants, when there's an overgrowth of plants, they're absorbing the oxygen out of the water, and then literally nothing can survive. So even mussels end up dying. There are still to this day dead zones within the Great Lakes region where we first discovered them there in the mid 80s. And to answer your question too, again, with, you know, whether we act on trying to prevent them from spreading or not, there was one state that didn't really take they weren't proactive in trying to prevent the spread, and many of the lakes in that region around Lake Superior became infested, and it causes a lot of other damage besides ecological damage, which I'll talk about in a minute. Whereas like the state of Minnesota, the state of 1,000 lakes, they did take a lot of measures to protect their lakes throughout the state. And as a result, they aren't dealing with the ecological and economical impacts that come with an infestation. It's way cheaper to invest in preventing the spread through education and getting proper equipment than to paying and managing an infested situation. So economically, what's happening is they damage infrastructure by clogging things up. So that could be anything from irrigation to agriculture, which this is something we're a bit worried about with California being one of our major sources of income. And, you know, the Delta water goes to a lot of ag land. So that's an issue. We unfortunately do have quagga and zebra mussels in Southern California. Ever since they popped up there in 2007, residents in Southern California have been paying more on their utility bills. We've learned from places like Arkansas, who have had this problem for a while, their produce prices go up. You know, infrastructure, the costs of trying to clean, manage, hire staff to deal with it is astronomical. And then culturally, well, you know, a lot of reservoirs will get closed down, sometimes not, but because these organisms, when they cause all the die off and then there's this dissolved oxygen issue, then you get a lot of problematic, harmful algal blooms. And this is something that's already exacerbated by climate change with warming, and some places, especially the West, where we're just getting less and less rain. This causes a problem with harmful algal blooms. And we're already seeing this. We're seeing it even in places that don't have mussel infestation. So that picture you see in the upper right, where that woman is standing, honestly, you don't want to be near this stuff. It is a cyanobacteria. It's a neurotoxin, and it could, I mean, dogs have died swimming in it. People are getting sick. You can get a rash if you're exposed to it for too long. You will have neurological damage. So, and I'll just throw this out there: use water and soap to clean. You don't want to wash your hands with any of the alcohol based like Purell, because the alcohol will actually dissolve the cell walls of the algae, releasing even more toxins. So be aware of all these things that are in our environment. And this map that I am showing here, this is going to give you an example of just California. So basically, let's talk about the red circles. So the quagga and zebra mussel locations, we have mostly all but one quagga mussel infested reservoirs, and they're all in Southern California. Why? Because Lake Mead became infested with them in around 2007. And we noticed it didn't take long for their larval stage to float down the aqueduct, because a lot of Southern California gets their water from the Colorado River system. So that's where most of those quagga mussel infested reservoirs are. We managed to keep them just in the Colorado River system, but eventually they did spread a little bit up near like Castaic, Pyramid, Lake Piru. But there are programs there that have exit inspections, and these help prevent them spreading even more. And we've managed to keep this at bay since 2008. I mean, they've spread a little bit since then, but they certainly would have spread a lot more if we did nothing. That little circle that you see, number 31, there's a little reservoir called San Justo. It's near Hollister. in California that has zebra mussels, and it's been closed to the public ever since. And it's angered a lot of local residents that used that reservoir. Likely the introduction to with zebra mussels, because a little story I'd heard from the managers that they had a friend who was a bass fisherman from Wisconsin. Wisconsin was one of the states that became very infested, but didn't do a lot of proactive measures to prevent the spread. And it was likely that his boat brought the zebra mussels into California, because there aren't any zebra mussel infestations in the West other than that location. Now, moving on to the golden mussels, so the golden circles, that's the areas of California that we are seeing them now. The reason you see that one little circle down below, and there's actually a few more that have developed just south of there, that's part of the State Water Project, because the State Water Project is siphoning water out of the Delta. And it was mostly it was basically the Port of Stockton that we first found them. And through all the conveyance and water systems and moving water around the state of California, we're seeing that spread. And this is going through a lot of ag land. So that is a concern. Now, golden mussel presence. So these are the locations. Like I said, there's like a few more red dots south of that southern dot that you see, but basically they're spreading throughout the Delta in parts of some, not quite in the Sacramento River yet, but Sacramento River water, very low calcium levels, which, you know, wasn't a huge concern with quag and zebra mussels, but we're seeing the golden mussels spread. Haven't found them too much in the Sassoon Bay area yet. We're not sure. It's a learning process. We don't know what's going to happen. The salinity in Sassoon Bay, where on that map where you see coastal range, where you see the word range and that bay, that's the third bay of the San Francisco Bay Delta. That's Sassoon Bay. We're expecting to see them there. Salinity wise, they can handle it. Thus far, we have not. So this is a, you know, something to anticipate. The golden mussel absence. Now, since we learned of this, and because we had the knowledge and the preparation with all the golden mussel, Dreissenid mussel prevention programs, we got the word out as fast as we could and trained people like we're doing now and how to look for them. And some of these dots are actually just the public reporting, which I'm going to show you later in the presentation, where you can report if you a finding and how and what to look for. So all those blue dots are where we're not finding them thus far, and hopefully it'll stay that way. Now, here's a little thing to know. This little graph, and this isn't even all of it. This is just partially of what amount of boating is leaving the Delta. So this is showing all the boats where they've gone to a lake, went through an inspection station, and were known to have the Delta being their last place that they had left. And if you look, Lake Berryessa, that actually, talking to the managers at Lake Berryessa, that's even a short count. They figure really, in reality, it was more like 2,000 boats that had come from the Delta. In fact, right now, as we speak, there's a houseboat that came from the Delta that hadn't been properly decontaminated of all the golden mussels on it and wanted to launch at Berryessa. Obviously, they knew they have a very robust inspection program now, and it's getting decontaminated and prolonged quarantine period. So I want to share, this is December. I was taking this video right here. This is the Port of Stockton. And something to note, if you were to just walk around the Delta, because the Delta is tidally influenced, you're not going to see mussels growing along the rocks under things. You have to literally either go deeper down where it's darker or under things, like under docks, under boats. That's where you'll find them. We have some crew that will, you can reach under a dock in a lot of sections of the Delta and pull off mussels off the undersides. And this is a mooring line, and I noticed that it was at least 6 feet below the surface of the water where the mussels were starting to attach and be happy. And they definitely have that telltale gold color. Here's just a still of it. Now, you've learned there's lots of species out there. Caesar's talked about them. Jonathan's talked about them. We really need to think holistically, not myopically, not just on one thing, because if it's not one thing, it's another. And I've tried to, every time I give a presentation, I always like to say this, prepare for everything and prepare for the worst scenario, because there's so many things coming. Humans, we're kind of a funny species. We really need to work on being more proactive than reactive. And unfortunately, a lot of places still operate on the reactive side of things. We're seeing this in some portions of the state where they didn't bother to have an inspection program because they thought, oh, we're not going to need to worry about it. But like I said, if it's not one organism, it's going to be another, and you don't always see them. Many of these things are microscopic. So the life cycles of mussels, they start off in their veliger stage too small for our eyes to see. So that's why we have the clean, drain, and dry messages, which I'm going to discuss and share more in detail in a minute. But there's so many ways that, we can stop prevent the spread of them. Like Jonathan mentioned, the Don't Let It Loose program promoting responsible pet ownership. And all these links, Vivian will be supplying all these links that we're talking about in the post email. But how can we, just the general citizens, work towards helping this issue? Well, there's something called citizen science. And I'm just going to mention, there's some really awesome TED Talks on citizen science that if you just go to TED Talks and Google citizen science, there's a lot of scientists out there that gave really nice presentations why why citizen science is a very helpful thing. How do you report golden mussels? Well, this link right here, which you'll have later too. And even if you don't remember this link, just remember golden mussel. If you go to CDFW golden mussel, it'll link you to our website and the golden mussel page, which there is a map that will show you all the locations that the mussels have been found, all the locations that they're not being found, and a bunch of facts and links, and also how to report. The report, if you click on the report button, it's very easy. It's just a step-by-step it'll walk you through it. Just get a photo. It's important to have a photo, and please put something to scale so we can see the size of the organism, because something can look really huge or really teeny depending on how you take a photo of it. Now, there's some other nice things to have that you can just put on your phone, like EDD Maps is app that you can put on your phone or laptop or whatever. And what's nice about it is that you can also report some things there, but it also has photos. So if you're out, and it doesn't matter what part of the world, we've got an international crowd right here. I did put in the chat a link for the global invasive species database. I've got some national ones here, federal ones that are mostly for the States and North America, but there are global ones as well. And we are a global community. We need to just not really think that there are borders anymore, because that's a waste of time. So you've heard this before, but you'll get to hear it again. Clean, drain, and dry. That is the motto. So this applies to saltwater and marine, freshwater environments. It applies to everything, quite frankly. Everywhere you go, you should clean your gear. And anything that comes in contact with the water. I mean, I've pulled New Zealand mud snails off my dog from, playing in a river that I knew was infested with New Zealand mud snails. It's important to think, where was I? And, if you're traveling and on the road, like on a road trip, you could be in a different watershed the next day and your gear could still be wet or having organisms on it that are still alive. And there's a lot of, I don't have time to get into details, but I can just tell you there are organisms that can survive amazing lengths of time and conditions. So assume things could be surviving on your gear. Having a way to wash stuff, I'll talk about it. You'll see a nice video. And this is stuff we can have just as personal stuff. Like a lot of the stuff I use for work, but I use personally as well. And remember, like the stop, drop, and roll method, clean, drain, and dry just needs to be added onto it. So now what? What do we do? How do we clean, drain, and dry? And what do we look for? Well, there's lots of protocols online. The gentleman had mentioned, there's lots of YouTubes that will talk about this. And if you need more detail in what activities that you are involved in, you can go online and get some ideas from there for what we're not going to be able to cover in this workshop. But I have a video and I'd like to share it with you right here.
In this section, we're going to discuss vessel and gear inspection and decontamination. Assume that wherever you go, whether it's local or abroad, you're likely going to be carrying something back with you on your gear. You will want a scrub brush, a pick to pry out areas such as pebbles and mud in your boot treads, and a thermometer to make sure you have the water hot enough to kill organisms. The smaller the organism, the faster they die. For tougher gear, use hot water at 140 degrees. For sensitive gear, such as scuba equipment and data sondes and other such equipment with sensitive probes, use warm air temperature water. If all you have is a cold hose, then use it. It's better than nothing. Have a gear box. It's an easy way to store gear as well as to submerge it in hot water that can be heated with the portable tea kettle. For things like waders, neoprene, scuba gear, use 100-degree water. As a rule of thumb, for sensitive gear, use water as hot as your hand can handle. This can also be done at home in the bathtub. If you are concerned about melting your gear, contact the manufacturer for verification. This is an example of my field gear decontamination setup. This can apply to field scientists, contractors, as well as the recreationist. The photo on the right is my work truck in which I fashioned a hanging rack system with the use of 2 telescoping boat hooks. This is where I hang waders, nets, lines, and other gear. Because this is work-related, I have designated gear that is only used at one water body. But should I have to use the same gear in a different water body on the same day, it's imperative to make sure to kill anything hitchhiking on the equipment. When at all possible, use hot water. The use of chemicals in some cases, such as medical or specific scientific applications, are required, but for general purposes, hot water will do. Chemicals are harmful to us, our gear, and the environment. Vinegar is also a less harmful and less toxic replacement in some cases. The 12-volt tea kettle is how I heat the water. The portable pressure washer with 3 power sources is how I hose down gear, and the portable steamer is how I decon difficult-to-reach places on gear that can handle such heat, such as felt-bottom wader boots, boot treads, and areas of boats that are difficult to reach. All of these items are relatively inexpensive and can be found on Amazon, Walmart, and other locations. The portable pressure washer stores easy in any vehicle, has a long-lasting internal rechargeable battery, but can also be run off a 12-volt or an external battery source like a Jackery. The pressure washer generally knocks most things off, but for more stubborn areas, use a brush. We were just in a golden mussel-infested location, so we followed it up with a vinegar spray that we let sit for 10 minutes and then rinsed later, and also allowed the gear to dry out for several days. Sometimes freezing gear overnight is an option, but this isn't always available for everyone, and it doesn't always kill everything, such as funguses. Clean footwear last, making sure to thoroughly clear the tread and lacing. This is where soaking or steaming comes in handy. For smaller vessels, create a system to clean everything off before you leave that location. In this scenario, I use my truck as a mounting station. I clean the back end first and the middle, making sure to get all the nooks and crannies. You'll be surprised where you can find small organisms. Then I load the boat and clear off the nose part that was touching the ground. Then I clean off the back of the truck, and then I close up and leave. I will make sure the vessel is also dry before I use it anywhere else. This location has a cleaning station next to the launch area. It includes a rack, a hose, and a brush that's attached to a cable. It is encouraged for all recreational boating areas to have a cleaning station. Even when you think you cleaned the boat well off in the water, it's very difficult to get all the small stuff. In this case, I counted 19 little snails, some of which were the very invasive New Zealand mud snail, on this paddleboard after pulling it out of the lake. After cleaning, find a good place to set the vessel to dry. Use a towel if you can't wait for the sun to dry it. If there are no cleaning stations available, another relatively easy option is to get a set of portable sawhorses. They are multi-use, inexpensive, and portable. For larger vessels, make sure to clear anything off stuck to the boat, trailer, anchor, lines, and anywhere else in the vessel. Remember to pull the plug and dry out even the bilge area prior to launching it at any different water body. For a more in-depth training on inspection and decontamination, contact the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission. They offer this training for free. The link will be provided in the follow-up.
Great. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So, yeah, like I said, there's numerous videos out there, YouTubes. This is just an example of what you would go through if you were to go boating at Lake Berryessa. There's lots of resources of what the different agencies are doing. And as I mentioned, some are closed because they don't have the staff and the equipment yet, and it's going to take time for them to get all that in place before they can start opening up to public boating again. Some are even considering never doing it just because of all the varying factors. And there's, you know, millions of people relying on that water source. So, like I said, there's lots of information. If you don't want to just know about quag and zebra mussels, there's other invasives out there, for example, nutria and other. Well, if you go to this link we have right here, the conservation/invasives at our website, will give you a list and fact of others. There's a lot of details I glossed over here just for the sake of time. But like I said, if you want specific details, like for example, how long do mussels survive out of the water? Well, honestly, there hasn't been enough studies and time for us to learn this yet with golden mussels, but we can tell you with quagga mussels and zebra mussels, they can survive up to 45 days out of water when temperature is cool and high precipitation. When it's hot and dry, you know, usually within about 5 days, you'll know they're dead when their shells open up. All these organisms I've been talking about, they're bivalves, which means there's two shells that close together. An indication that they're dead is the shells open up. Now, there are other locations or links. westernais.org is a good one. This is also where you can find the inspector decon training for larger vessels. And then there's a national location, and this one's a good one to know. It does include Canada and Mexico. This is a federal one. The USGS puts this one on. NAS stands for non-native aquatic species. And there you can get a list of, if you want to just specify a state, if you want to know Arkansas or Tennessee or California or all of the above, you can find out not only aquatic, but also terrestrial invasive species. And they actually have this link. There's interactive maps there. Another really good resource. There's curriculum if you want to teach or share, but also if you want to get warnings, you can set up a warning email where, kind of like the mosquito vector email for West Nile or whatever, you can specify that you want to know when a new aquatic invasive species shows up in your area. You'll receive an email saying where and when. And if you want it only to know for California, you can specify just California. Or if you want to know the whole nation, you can, you know, get emails for that, though that would probably fill up your your inbox. But I just wanted to thank you all for being a part of this. I know this is a lot of information. I didn't answer or talk about everything. I figured if there's something you really want to know, I told you where you can get it, or you can ask me right now. And it does take a village. It's not just scientists and legislators that can do this. We all have to. So spread the message and not the muscle, and help explain why we have the program set up that we do, because there's still a lot of people that are upset at lake closures and not really understanding the whole picture. And, you know, we are making a difference. So thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Great, great information. Tons to learn. And we just got a question in the chat from Cheryl. She's down in beautiful Southern California, and she's asking, how are organisms disposed of once they are cleaned off a vessel or items like shoes, waders, wetsuits, etc.? We may clean them off?
Very good question. So what you want to do, and my practice is, and really one that we should all practice, is wherever we travel, check and clean your gear before you leave. So at least, you know, if there are organisms on it, they're going back into the water body they were or in that area. So that's why, you know, the video that I put together right there, I was doing all that cleaning right after I got out before I left the place. If you do find yourself, okay, you found something in your gear that you didn't know was there. For example, I had gotten a call from a lady who had just returned from Hawaii, the big island. And many of you have gone there. You've heard the coqui frogs at night that sound like birds. A coqui frog, they had taken their grandson to, you know, take him to Hawaii and experience Hawaii. And there was a coqui frog in his Crocs when they got back to San Francisco, and it was alive. And so I had let her know of a CDFW office that can humanely euthanize it. So if you come across that, contact our department, and somebody will lead you to the person to properly euthanize it. Another thing too is whatever you do when you're washing your gear, especially if you're not from the source that it came from, don't wash it on your driveway. It's going to flow down into the gutter and go out into the nearby creek and potentially spread an invasive species. It has happened that big, you know, with that method before. So yeah, just and also just think about, you know, sink water. If it's small stuff in your bathtub and it's not going to clog up your drain, that's going to go to city treated water. So that's another safe place to clean your gear. Like you saw my scuba gear in my bathtub there. I don't hear you, Vivian, but I think I could.
I'm sorry. There's a question also in the chat from Steve Moore, and it says, New Zealand mud snails were discussed much. What is the mud snail status at Lake Tahoe?
The mud snail, unfortunately, they're there. They initially were introduced into the Truckee River, and because of all the traffic, the human traffic there, they did end up in Tahoe. And that's actually kind of a good point that I want to mention. The fact that people think, oh, you know, they are not going to survive there. We didn't think Asian clam or any kind of mussel-shelled organism would survive Tahoe because there wasn't enough calcium levels there. But there's several reasons. Because of a lot of the human structure, it has introduced calcium, but we have seen the spread of Asian clam throughout the lake and even New Zealand mud snails. So don't assume that just because there's some biology that we thought we knew, you know, think the world is changing. It's a very fast changing place in in our solar system right now. So just assume anything could possibly survive there. And you can go to that map, the USGS map will show you all the locations of New Zealand mud snails in California and throughout the country. And even the CDFW website has a New Zealand mud snail page. So if you need more detail, you can also go there. Is it a problem? Yeah. Do we want, I mean, they, you know, like we've mentioned all of us earlier, invasive species inhibit biodiversity. They tend to take over and make it difficult for other things to survive. So just because they're in a location doesn't mean we should give up. And there are scientists and groups out there looking at ways at eradicating things. And in some cases it works. Some cases it slows it down. So it's still worth doing an effort rather than nothing.
Mm-hmm. We have two more questions. One is from Sean. Sean is with NOAA, and he says, can you envision a similar inspection, certification, and cleaning program for vessels in saltwater harbors, marinas?
You know, that's a very good question, and it's not established enough. And there's a lot of people, there's a lot of sailors and boaters around the world that like to boat around the world. And that is something I know we're doing it now. We're doing the education now. Again, this is where, you know, you just do it amongst your peers, especially, you know, with saltwater boaters. they tend to hang out in groups. They, might be living in marinas and they know each other. So share what you know with others that may haven't heard it yet. And that is a very good point. I know we've got the dock walker program. So, take it upon yourself and start one at a club meeting or whatever as well.
Mm-hmm. We have a question. Worst case, when do you anticipate golden mussel to be detected at Lake Oroville? Lake Oroville is the start of the state water project. Oh, that's a sad question. Hopefully never.
Yeah, I like to be glass half full and never say yet, and say we aim to keep the mussels out forever. And I think if we keep that attitude, we can do it. And if we can keep educating the folks, if you find that people in that area, maybe the agency, maybe the, marina owners might have a indifferent attitude about it, share with them what you know. And it's really important to not be, there's a lot of people, governments are governments. A lot of people are frustrated with government organizations, yet there's a lot of really good work government is doing. And this is the case where we are. And I've found this, many of my colleagues have found that there's just kind of this stalwart, this block with some folks that just want to, it's just government closing our lake and trying to control what we're doing again. But, help enlighten people as to why some of these programs are in place. And it does actually, if you explain to them, and I always find too, if you explain how it's going to affect them specifically, and it's almost always with the pocketbook and how it's going to affect their, their revenue and their fun, then they start to go, okay, well, maybe I need to look into this.
Excellent. And that's why we put together this kind of workshops, is just to try to make sure that we empower every participant. So you can help us also to spread the word out. We have been doing a lot of education and a lot of outreach at different events with postcards, tons of different things, but we need a lot of help, and also understanding that is not because we want to make people's life miserable, is because it's really needed. Otherwise, all of us will pay the consequence. And that example of Lake Oroville would be horrible. We don't even want to think about this. That's why we have to start controlling what's going on and stopping the spread. So it is.
There are festivals, a lot of places have community events that include these booths there to help spread the word and make it fun. I know I can tell you in my region, for example, there's several events that go on. There's one called the Water and Wags Festival that Santa Clara County does. And they have aquatic invasive species. They have me and colleagues sharing this information, and people come by and learn about it and like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I'm going to do that from now on.
Yeah. So we have more time for questions. At the meantime, I want to invite everybody to help us filling out the evaluation form, which I'm going to be including in the chat right now. You will also receive a follow-up email with all the resources just in one place, so it's easy and convenient for you to save it, and reminding you to please help us filling out the evaluation form. We want one evaluation form from every participant. And we'll stay here for more questions. We were done ahead of time, and we have one more question. It says, when you say 26 billion annually for the US, where does that money come from? Who is financially responsible for eradication of invasive aquatic plants, specifically plants? I don't know, Catherine or Jonathan, if you want to take that.
Kind of both of our questions right there. I can tell you, Division of Boating and Waterways mostly is handling eradication of aquatic plants in California. So I know the Federal Agency Fish and Wildlife Service often takes part in that, but maybe not as much as they used to. Caesar, I'll let you answer to that, but yeah.
I think Caesar jumped off.
Yeah,
Okay.
he needed to leave.
Okay.
I think the question is, I'm just going to read it again, right? When you say, is it the 26 billion annually for the US? And then where does that come from? Is that the question we're answering?
Yeah, and it's also in the chat. It says when you say
Yeah.
26 billion annually for the US, where does that money come from and who's financially responsible for eradication of invasive plants specifically? And I can respond to Steve about the invasive species. The Division of Boating and Waterways treats some of the plants that are listed based on the law and included in the link that I'm including there, but they are mainly in the Delta region, not across the state. We're only treating in the Delta region. Go ahead, Jonathan, sorry.
Yeah, I think that's part of the answer, right? So who is financially responsible for eradication of invasive aquatic plants? I think Division of Boating and Waterways is interested in the Delta for the invasive aquatic plants because it's they want to, I believe, I'm speaking for Division of Boating and Waterways, try not to, but I think that they're what they're trying to do is make sure that there's access to waterways for boating for folks, and that's part of what they do. So that's partly why they would do that. There's also the USDA APHIS. They have a role to play in responding to aquatic invasive plants and their introduction. And then it could be like a lot of times it'll be a local water district, or sometimes a like a larger entity like Department of Water Resources, or it could be it just depends on where it's introduced. And then as far as what makes up that $26 billion, it's not all related to eradication. And one thing that we didn't talk about a lot during this part of our presentations was that there's relatively few, I'm not even going to say relatively, there's very, very few examples where we can show that eradication has occurred. A prime example of where we can show eradication occurred was for that initial introduction of Caulerpa taxifolia down in Southern California, not the proliferar, not the one that just came in or was recently detected. There was a huge effort, $7 million was spent, and that was just for one species in one area, and a lot of money was thrown at that. The way that you have to be able to eradicate is you have to be able to show, or the way that you show that eradication is done is that you have to be able to document its presence, find out where it is in all the areas that it is, and then you have to go through and you have to survey that for a certain period of time before you can say, yeah, it's eradicated. Yeah, Catherine, what's up?
To add to that too is the fact that you have to consider that most of our water systems, they're open moving water systems. They're not closed-ended systems. Where there has been some successful eradication, they were like quarries or, a dead-end system, but you can't stop water from going in and out of the Delta, down the state water projects, particularly California, of all states, moves water more than any other state. And you can't just stop a water system because we're not really capable technologically right now to do that without serious cataclysm.
Yeah. I just wanted to also just kind of say that there's an example of a species that we haven't seen in the Bay Delta for a while. We can't prove that it's been eradicated, but no one's seen it for many, many years now, at least a decade, or maybe 5 years, is the Chinese mitten crab in Northern California. So it may have been eradicated, but we can't say that for sure. But then as far as so that's eradication's got a lot of issues with it as far as being able to document that it's done, and then it's a high cost to be able to show that it's absolutely gone. What happens a lot of times is you have management of aquatic invasive species. So Catherine mentioned really well in her presentation about, and maybe Caesar did, I know we mentioned it somewhere, that there's an increased cost. People's bills have gone up because the folks in Southern California, the ones that move water around, they have to manage that waterway, so they have to periodically drain the Colorado River aqueduct, apply chlorine, clean their infrastructure off, and that's to make it. If they just let it go and didn't apply those costs and apply those measures, they would get clogged up and cease to work and function. So that's just an example of where, like, a local example of having to manage an invasive species, and who pays for it, and how much it costs. So that doesn't really give you a dollar amount on how much that costs, but that's it's not all prevention, it's not all eradication. Most of it comes into, hey, we just need to keep the water flowing, so we're going to have to continually spend X amount of dollars every year just to keep the water flowing. Yeah, Catherine.
And to elaborate with what Jonathan is saying is that there are grants out there. They're both federal, state, and local that are sources for us to be able to fund these programs, which is included in these costs that we are sharing with you here.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention that's related to Cheryl's question, and then we'll go to Sean's question about the state has grants, and in the follow-up email we're going to send you, you will see a couple of examples, not only from the Division of Boating and Waterways for local governments for quag and zebra, but now Catherine's agency has a new funding opportunity for that purpose. So you will have that information, Cheryl. Thank you for mentioning that. And I wanted just to go to Sean's comment. He's for the group. Are there too many different reporting hotlines? Is consolidation necessary possible? There are only two. And this is for Sean. As you can see in your hotline, in your handout, there's one for any reporting invasive species, which is managed by Catherine's agency at the bottom of the handout, and the other one, because it's specifically related to weeds in the Delta, that's for the DVW reporting hotline. Other than that, it's just those two phone numbers. And let me check here. We have a couple of more.
Can I add to that too really quick, Vivian?
Of course.
Do know that all of our agencies, we have an invasive species task force. So we all speak together and share this information. So if you have an organism that you're concerned about that maybe a different agency handles, we will pass that on. So honestly, I know that's a confusing thing, and we really should just have one central thing, but we're not quite there yet as a species. We're working on it, as a human species, that is. But yeah, if you just, focus on CDFW, Fish and Wildlife, California State Fish and Wildlife, and if you're a federally involved person, maybe outside of California, you also have the federal one, which is that USGS location. We all speak to each other, so eventually we will all share that information. So just be aware of that.
Thank you. And we have a question from Steve. He says, we have a real problem with milfoil in Tahoe Keys and privately, spending millions in testing. Is this the sole responsibility of the homeowners?
I can try to take that, Vivian, and just
Go ahead.
I just want to say that, like, I don't feel comfortable being the one answering questions specifically about Lake Tahoe, and what's I know that there's a lot of work going on up there. They have an aquatic invasive species coordinating committee that works up there. I know there's a lot of resources and people that would love to talk to you about that, Steve, from the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, Tahoe Resource Conservation District, and a few other folks up there. I'm sure there's somebody from Catherine's organization, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, that wouldn't mind getting you in touch with the right folks. I know this is a big topic for them up there, and it would be probably best to defer to the local experts on that.
Yeah, I can include that question was from Steve. Steve, I'm going to include directly to you the link to the person with the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency that you may want to check right here. His name is Thomas Booz, and he works in that agency in case you want to contact and learn a little bit about that issue. All right, no problem, Steve. Let's see, so it is 11:44. Thank you everybody for spending the time with us today. Please make sure again you fill out the evaluation form, which will be very important for us to get your feedback. This is a work in progress. For a couple of years, we didn't have the saltwater invasive species, so we brought Jonathan as an expert, and I think he did a great job, you know, really giving us information on hands-on actions we can take. And of course, Catherine and her, well, amazing knowledge about the mussels. It's great. And thank you everybody for joining us today. It's 11:45. Please help us with the evaluation form. We'll send you a follow-up email with all of our contact information and much more. If you need more time to digest information, or if you have a specific questions, all the information will be there. And Catherine and Jonathan, if you can stay after the group leaves, and I'm going to stop recording here.